Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Nice to see so many of you have made it down to the underbelly of the Barbican for this second Hive session, your second and final Hive session of World Design Congress. My name's Joe Isles. I lead design activation at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We're an organization that tries to build a more positive future, particularly around the principles of a circular economy. Hello to everyone watching online. Only a couple of the Hive sessions at Congress have been streamed. This is the second one, so thank you to all of you joining to follow the conversation online. This one's about communities, AI, artificial intelligence, and collective impact. Don't know why I spelled artificial intelligence out. You all know what AI means by now. I mentioned designing the future, a more prosperous future, the future that we want. That means using different ways of designing, different ways of collaborating, ways that celebrate the involvement of people, or celebrate and leverage what technology can do for us as well. And that's going to be the focus of the next two panel discussions. First up, we'll be looking at the topic of designing deeply with communities. And then we'll move on to the subject of technology and artificial intelligence after that. How it's going to work is there'll be about 30 to 35 minutes of discussion on the stage with some fabulous moderators. I want you to send your questions in. It's Slido. It's in the Design Congress app. No doubt you've used it already over the past day and a half. Make sure you're logged into the correct room. This is Cinema 1. And ask your questions or give it a little thumbs up. Boost the questions that you want to hear answered. Someone already asked a question in the lobby, so I know that there'll be at least one question that comes in over the next hour and a bit. So first up, our first panel, it's about equipping communities with design tools and knowledge to foster self-reliance, social equity, and environmental progress. And I'm going to invite Sevra Davis, who's going to chair the panel. Sevra is the Director of Architecture, Design and Fashion at the British Council. Round of applause for Sevra.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Joe, for that introduction. As Joe said, I'm Sevra Davis. I'm Director of Architecture, Design and Fashion at the British Council. The British Council is the UK's cultural relations organisation, and our work is all about connecting the UK with other countries around the world. Our work is predicated on the belief that cross-cultural collaboration is critical, not only to tackling the collective challenges we face, but also vital to a shared future in which we don't only survive, but also flourish. Collaboration is such a lovely thing, isn't it? It speaks to togetherness, cooperation, and shared goals. But true collaboration is also messy and uneasy. It means difficult conversations and addressing often uncomfortable and unequitable histories and the legacy of exploitative relationships with people and with our planet. So collaboration, whether across cultures or with communities, is very, very hard, and that is precisely why we must do it. I hope we'll hear more perspectives on this afternoon. So let me introduce our illustrious panel. I'd like to start by inviting Michelle Morris to the stage. Michelle is Associate Director at the Design Lab at UC San Diego, among a variety of other leadership roles. She's the former Chief Design Officer of the World Design Capital 2024. Thanks for that. I didn't even say that, but let's clap for everybody. Former Chief Design Officer at the World Design Capital 2024, which was a binational collaboration, San Diego, Tijuana. Let me next invite Jaden Ali to the stage. Jaden. Jaden is the founding director of JA Projects. He is an architect, artist, and filmmaker with a wide portfolio. And I get to say that in 2023, Jaden co-curated the exhibition in the British Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, and very proud that he and I worked together closely in that capacity. So it's a real honor to have him on this panel. Next, I'd like to invite Suma Balaran Chippers to the stage, please. Suma. Suma is Associate Creative Director at Purpose, where she creates change-making campaigns and helps to define movements that address pressing global issues. And next we have Michael. Oh, have I lost Michael? There he is.
Look at the entrance. Yeah.
Michael Bennett is a social activist, philanthropist, designer, and a former professional American football player and NFL Super Bowl champion. And our last panelist is Kavya Saxena. Kavya, let's invite Kavya and clap for her. Kavya Saxena is director at Camir, a premier grassroots organization working with over 5,000 artisans across multiple communities in the Kutch district of India. Welcome, Kavya. So, as you can see, we have quite a lineup here. We have about 35 minutes for us to have a discussion, and then, as Joe said, there'll be time for questions from all of you. So let's get straight into it. I'd like to start with you, Kavya, and ask you if you can tell us a bit about your work and particularly what it means to you to cultivate a community champion.
Hi, everyone. I hope you had a great lunch. And I think when we were just discussing before the panel started that we will be talking about this one hook, which is how to cultivate, or how have we been cultivating community champions. It literally felt like this black and white reel on my mind that I was playing. I come from a absolutely non-design background, an industrial labor major who has studied law and contract labor acts. And I was working in an oil industry for the longest of my time at the start of the career, which is so unlike design, creativity, creative economy. And probably that's when the bug hit me when I was traveling to these remote areas where oil pipelines were being laid across in the Indian subcontinent and its oceans. And I was like, probably I need to do more. But then still, the plunge did not come easy. It took me a while. And few years later, I saw myself working with vulnerable tribes. And currently, as Sevra said, I head this organization called Camir. We lie in the westernmost part of India and Pakistan. And Camir particularly specializes in working in craft-led value chains, which means that we work with the entire spectrum of how a certain natural fiber or a raw material or an ingredient can not just be looked from the perspective of a farm or an individual or a cluster herder, right to even going to market identification, penetration, sales, revenue, getting back to economy. So yeah, that's a little black and white reel about me, too soon. But then, yeah, let's come to the main question. To start this discussion, and I'm sure my panelists will be adding so much more depth to it. To me, keeping the limited time that we have, I feel that if I really need to categorize, and the body of work that I pursue, it has got to do with a lot of indigenous communities, massive amount of culture. I mean, India's intangible heritage is something I can go on talking about, and I'm extremely proud of it. And when I see that, I would want to divide it into three areas, how I see the champions of community getting. Number one is, how do we amplify local voices? Now, there was a report by UNESCO in 2023, which says that artisan sector across is one of the largest employment gap which is there globally. Now, this is not just global south, but I'm talking about world over. And all of these artisans or makers, or you would say unorganized sector, hardly have any say in the main design policies of the world, in probably even how markets are driven, economies play their scale. So that's point number one. The second that I want to highlight is safeguarding intangible heritage. This is extremely precious to me. When we think about anything that is handmade, it is slow. It comes from the whole idea of slow living, slow fashion. It is not just made by hands. It has a lot of element of the soil, the climate, the air, the generational history that's coming, and all of that translates into that one product we probably wear or consume. And in almost all of the times, even till today as I speak in 2025, this intangible part is not documented well. And I feel this is very, very critical, that how do we take this aspect forward? The third point that I feel is very critical in the design approach as we speak here is equity of these makers in the global value, global value chain. Even, I mean, I can always say in perspective of Global South particularly, which is contributing as a major manufacturing hub in the world. Till today, if we go to retail value of the products, whether it is fashion, agriculture, only 10 to 15% goes back to the maker. So they having hardly any say in the pricing decision or the way future design approaches are taken is something I would like to deeply talk about in today's panel. Hopefully we get some more time. But I think I will want to restrict my points to this.
Thank you, Kavya. Michael, it'd be wonderful to hear about your work and your view on cultivating community champions.
You're such a great job. I don't know if I even No, for me, my kind of coming from the athletic world obviously is a lot different from design, but in so many ways they kind of correlate, because I think in design and cultivating champions kind of really starts with collaboration and how we kind of collaborate, how the change, the cycles or things are made. You know, as an architect, you may design the building, but then there's the engineers, there's everybody, the craftsmen, even designing furniture. There's so many systems that come into making one object. And I think for me, that's just like football or design. Well, in football, it's like you go out there and the coach makes a play up, the game starts, but it's like there's so many parts to make the one whole, to make that actual play kind of happen. And for me, that's how design kind of started. Like, I've always kind of been in the activism world or being very active to things that are happening globally. It's like, as an athlete, what's your role as a human? And for me, that's kind of also design. It's like, what's your role as a human when designing, when thinking about sustainability? And I think for my practice, it's about this idea about African diasporic forms and languages through different spatial scales. So I kind of could work in architecture, installation, furniture, and just design overall. And I think everything I've kind of doing outside of design is like through my foundation. I actually have something, one of my foundations that I work with, it's called Champions of Change, and it's all about cultivating and collaborating with people who don't have platforms. You know, so we raise money and we work with different designers, different people who are champions, but may not have the platform to be recognized. And it's important when you have a platform to be able to shine the light on everybody that's out there doing, right? It's like just because something isn't seen, it's kind of like when designing a window, it's like, yeah, it's a wall there, but once you put that window in there, you frame something differently. And I think that's exactly what happens when you want to cultivate champions. You just need to be able to shine light on those who are doing the work, like, you know, that pipeline that we don't see. And I think my work sits there in between the philanthropy, the work that I do through design that I'm doing, and the human aspect of it, the philanthropy part of it. I think ultimately, I think about architecture as empathy for space. Either the space is defining us or we defining it.
Thank you, Michael. I think we'd love to hear more about your work, maybe some examples when we get into the questions. Suma, we'd love to hear from you about your work.
Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be here. And also so lovely to be here with all of my friends and talking about how we really believe in the power of how designing with people is just as powerful as designing for them. As Sevra mentioned, I'm an associate creative director at Purpose. We're a creative agency and strategic consultancy that focuses on social impact and tackling environmental issues. We build and support movements to advance the fight for an open, just, and habitable world. Our unique way of working centers co-creation and collaboration through every stage of our process. We also ensure that impact measurement is a part of every project that we do. We work with foundations, brands, and NGOs to accelerate work on ground. Sometimes that looks like very local interventions, and sometimes it looks like a big global campaign. When it comes to cultivating community champions, we do this in different ways, from empowering women climate leaders in India and fostering Islamic climate movements in Indonesia. Our work shows that social change happens when we bring people together in unexpected ways and build diverse coalitions. I've got a few examples of our work, but we can do that later as well.
Great. Okay, thank you, Sima. And Jaden.
Yeah, I mean, it's really amazing to listen to everybody here. Either the space is defining us or we're defining it, which is, I'm going to hold on to that one. I'm going to borrow that. I feel like I run a studio called J Projects. Our work is somewhere between building and urban design and performance and art and film. And essentially, we exist in that ecosystem because at the core, I'm interested in cities, and I'm interested in how we live, how we gather collectively, and the spaces we occupy, the objects that we orbit around. And so what that means is, as a practice, I'm really concerned with different mediums. I'm also really concerned with different scales. But at its core, we're trying to work out how we are concerned with other people, because living in cities is a collective act. I was doing some teaching earlier in the year at Columbia, and the studio was somewhere between art practice and somewhere between more formal architecture. And some of the students were coming under some criticism because they were doing some work which was kind of seemed on the surface level more art practice. But then a really great professor there, Mabel Wilson, said, at its core, the difference is that you're always designing for someone else. And that's what I think is at the kind of core of this question, how to cultivate some form of community champion. I was kind of thinking around it, and I was thinking about the essence of my studio. And I think it really comes down to a history of play work, and it really comes down to a history of youth work. Like, my mother was such a big youth worker. She was really embedded in East London. I went into that world, and I was doing play work at the same time as I was developing some form of architectural practice. And what that is that's about empowering others to take ownership of space. That's about allowing the freedom for children to make and dominate a space. And it's also about some form of kind of legacy. Actually, you're kind of designing some form of structures, some form of activity that allows them to exist and thrive when you're not there. And that kind of exists in our work. I mean, just to give you a few examples, this work we did with Sevra was very much in the kind of like more art space. I suppose all of our work exists across the kind of cultural realm, sometimes in the more formal spaces, sometimes in the more informal spaces. Of course, the British Pavilion is a very formal art space, but that takes the form of kind of film and music, and it's about, I think, how we cultivated some form of community champions in there, in which we have an overlap with Michael's work in terms of kind of the Black diaspora in the world, is that we really saw that as an infrastructural project, that we took some of the funding and we dispersed that to other artists, and that was a really kind of conscious decision. You can see that in other forms of projects that we're doing. We're working on the interiors of the new V&A East Museum, which will open in spring next year. And we worked for 2 years alongside an East London collective of young people. It's a museum for 16 to 24-year-olds. It's the whole premise of this museum and this interior is about looking at the spaces where young people felt most comfortable, most empowered, and how do we translate, not in a kind of crass way, but like in a kind of subtle way, the essence of the spaces that they feel that they can have control of. We're working at kind of a slightly larger scale, doing some stuff around the redesign of Piccadilly Circus, and also kind of dealing with kind of engagement and co-design, and co-design is such a big deal in our space. And then we're kind of working at this slightly more strategic level. We run this thing for the Mayor of London called the High Street Classroom. And really it's about a lifelong learning program and some form of knowledge exchange between boroughs, between traders, between shop owners, between visitors, that allows people to have a say in the space in which they live and they occupy. And the reason that quote resonated with me is because I often speak about it's important for spaces, the spaces we inhabit in cities, for people to see immediately themselves reflected in it, and to also understand that it is supportive of their needs or their agendas.
Thank you, Jaden. And Michelle, can we hear a bit about your work?
Yes,
Cultivating
And
Community
yeah,
Champions.
exactly.
It's lovely to be here with you all, and I'm just really excited to be on the stage with these inspiring change makers. My name is Michelle. I come from a varied, like a mosaic of different career chapters, from educator to law enforcement, journalist, performing artist, business consultant, you name it. And I say that simply to say that I've had the opportunity and the privilege to see community from really different lenses around the world. And the work that I do and that we do in the Design Lab, I've put it into this framework called the 4Ds. And I think it all starts with dignity, is that first one. I just think dignity, it's such a small word, but the impact when it's there and when it's not is just immense. And I think it's the seed of trust, which goes into the next D, which is dialogue. Trust is really, it's hard won, easily lost, very fragile, really lacking in our world. And I think dialogue is one of the most powerful tools that we have as humans, particularly the question, where we can be humble and open-minded at the same time to start to build this, cultivate this, not just one community champions, but a lot of community champions, right? And we're part of the community champions, so it's not that it's us helping, it's all of us symbiotically doing that together. The third one is around data. So we as community change makers, we need clarity. We need tools, and that comes from information. And one thing that we've really been finding in the Design Lab, and I've been finding as a designer and as a business person, is a lot of the data is either hardcore quantitative, it's statistical, it's measurement outputs, and the lived experience or the value-based decision making, that's harder. It's a lot harder. It's really hard to integrate. And it's hard to integrate seamlessly and consistently. And so I think we as designers or design-minded professionals have a real opportunity to synthesize information that can then help understand what's going on, which leads into the fourth one, which is design, which many of us know it's a mindset, it's an approach, it's tools, it's methods, but it's really about what we call making to make sense. You have to you have to make something visual or tangible or shareable in order for us to engage. And I think that's really the opportunity with design. And the final piece I think that's really important for cultivating community champions is they're not chosen, they emerge, and you have to have a space within which to do that. And I think spaces like this are amazing for that. And I have the privilege of working at the Design Lab at UC San Diego, founded by Don Norman, now run by Mein Nguyen. And it's this entity within academia and within, I'm happy to say, recently announced #1 public university in the US. Because we're a really young school, so yeah, okay, UCSD. Okay. But it's so great because we're not really part of a department, so we're this entity that is really focused on bringing together faculty and our networks across sectors and students and practitioners and business people. And because we have that space and we have frameworks like design to action networks and regional advancement labs, things that really only you can do in a place like academia or in institutions that have staying power, I think it's really powerful to have that to then allow the conditions to engage with communities and let community champions emerge and then be network multipliers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Michelle. I think it'd be lovely to hear a bit more about some specific examples drawing on all of the amazing introductions we've heard. And I'd love to start with you, Michael. Okay. It'd be great to hear some examples about maybe building on this point, which you touched on and all of you have picked up on around understanding and building trust within communities and maybe what is the role of not just design, but also designers in that. And I think, one of the things we've been overall conference has been about is how, what are the skills that designers need now and in the future? And I'd love to hear a little bit about your views on that, maybe drawn from some of your examples, Michael.
Yeah, I think for me, it kind of shows up not as design, right? I think sometimes as designers or people, we have all these titles that kind of put us in between barriers. It's almost like a pill, the coded language behind these things that create more barriers so people can't understand exactly what's happening. And I think in design, it's about allowing people to have space and really being intuitive and investigating and being able to listen. Because to listen, all of it kind of starts with this idea around love. And I think to love, you got to be able to listen. And I think when designing, it's really important that you listen to the communities that you're working with. Because I think sometimes, like, growing up in spaces where it lacks empathy, right? When I grew up in communities I grew up in, you can easily see that the person who designed this space wasn't thinking about how people would really exist, where the roads would be, how this would be, because they don't listen and they don't care. And I think now being a designer, I can see how easily that happens, right? Because you're in this room with a bunch of other designers and what's the best design, and you're kind of talking about, you know, Mies van der Rohe or Ando and all these kind of designers, and it's like really getting to the seed and core of just community in general. And I think that's through all the practice or things that I kind of do. It's like not having the fear to say that I don't understand the community. And that kind of starts with the first idea of when starting to sketching. I think for me, like a project that I'm working on right now is this idea around building motion. It's about creating like these secular spaces and communities of color where it isn't so much about religious kind of activities, but freedom of space for people to just exist inside of these structures, you know, working with it. It's like, how do you break the barriers of institution? Like, we all love museums, we all love community, we all love these things, but those things come with so many layers of being able to free. It's like, how does design become a form of resistance? And I think that's the starts with just making and not waiting for people to give you space, but to take that space. Take what you need to make it, right? Because if you don't, it'll never exist. And with this idea about building motions and through this night chapel, we kind of just are creating this architecture that sits there and people can use it and sign up any way they want to use it. I don't really have no language to say you have to do this in it, you have to do that in it. It's like the space is to be quiet and to allow people to just do what they need to do. And I think that's kind of the architecture and everything that I'm doing, whether it's like working on a museum project or furniture or sculpture. It's like, how do I continue to think about narrative in the objects that I'm making? You know, whether it's like a table, it's like when I think about being a black person in America, it's very traumatic, the history of how we came to exist in this country. I think sometimes when you're designing, you always have this thing on your back. I think as a white designer, you get the freedom of just creating a chair. I want to create a chair because I want to create a chair. I think sometimes when you're a person of color, you have to carry this burden of design that comes with a narrative. And I think with that idea, it's like I also like to create an idea of love. So when I started creating the table, I started thinking about my grandmother and the history of grandmothers and what they do in families, and then creating a chair, like the family structure, but continue to think of how things exist through the narrative in which they want to, I think is really the work that I'm doing a lot of. So, well, like I said, whether it's furniture, and I think in architecture too, I think when I think about public installations, sometimes it kind of gets really hard because you're working with a company. I was just working with a company, I don't want to say their name because I don't like them anymore, but at the end of the day, it came down to this idea of like trying to push a narrative on me because they see me as a conduit or a vessel for honesty and rawness. But with that honesty and rawness, I've always kind of stood on what I believed in. That's what got me into this position. You know, it's like I never was scared. When I was in the NFL, I didn't care that because I was there, I couldn't talk about Black Lives Matter. And it's like when I think about design, we got to be saying the truth of what's really happening in communities and people that's happening. So when I hear her talk, I'm really understanding what she's trying to say. I think that's really what design to me is, and through the work that I'm trying to do, it's like fearing like whether being in a magazine, all this kind of stuff, because at the end of the day, like none of that really matters. It's like, how do you bring people to the stage?
Thank you, Michael. I think directly building on what you've just said, I might come to Jayden because I think some of the things that Michael has just talked about are some of the themes that when we worked together on the British Pavilion and sort of in Venice, that you and the team were drawing out around spaces and how they're used and by whom and who gets a voice and all of that. And then also some of the, as Michael touched on, the sort of the burden sometimes of the narrative and how to sort of change that. And I wonder if you could say a few words about that project, Jayden.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, maybe as that was really great to hear. Maybe as a kind of an overview, we had this exhibition. It was called Dancing Before the Moon. It really took its lead from a James Baldwin quote, and it was really about refocusing our lens as to kind of how, instead of looking to the stars, looking at home as to how rituals and diasporic practice make space. If I was to zoom out from that a moment, because I think there is this kind of question, which is, you know, a Black designer talking about diasporic spaces. Definitely, that is the core of my practice. That is the core of my ambition. It exists and manifests itself in the more private practice. But the interesting thing I think about the studio and the dissection and the distinction between myself and the studio is that ambition to see a history that I know, which I think is like a hybrid history. You know, I grew up in East London. I'm in terms of heritage, I'm half Trinidadian, half Turkish Cypriot. I grew up in a space that was predominantly Bangladeshi, but with a really resonant white working class East End background. Like, that is the hybridity of the world, and I'm interested in the hybridity of the world manifesting itself in spaces. And I'm interested in people being able to see themselves respected and reflected in those spaces. And so that ambition extends beyond kind of the Black space as well, and the diasporic space. And I think in terms of kind of tools and tricks and the lenses and the methodology through which we go through that type of design process, is I think it always comes down to ideas of context. And specifically when we look at spaces that we're working in, thinking about the power dynamics that exist in those spaces. So, for example, in the British Pavilion, we understood that this was a colonial edifice that existed there in terms of time. We still have this infrastructure of power that exists in terms of, no shade, like the British Council kind of exists in this moment. But I also felt like there are really resonant moments where people have occupied that space previously in the past, and we sought to manifest and change some of those power dynamics. So, for example, when you came into the main space, you had this film, and I was a big advocate of this film was really about people. We had these sculptural works on the periphery, and they were about people also, but people weren't necessarily so present. But in the film, in the center, people were really, and the rituals that they conducted were really present. And that's because we realized that not everybody could go to Venice, right? Like, and actually, who did we want to be represented in that space? So that's the kind of context in which we're working. But that kind of lens exists in other spaces, you know, like I love the High Street Classroom program. Like, it's this kind of strange, messy, informal world where people are learning from each other. And what we've done is we've helped the mayor to say, okay, historically, if you look at the power dynamic, regen or development, however you want to frame it at city scale, has always been something that's top down. And it's been top down in terms of kind of the power to make assessments and design and for that to be constructed. But it's also been top down in terms of kind of knowledge. Like, it's the people at the top that had the knowledge, and you were kind of waiting for the mayor to release some form of funding scheme, et cetera, to come forward. And what we said is actually that's not how we feel the cities should be developed. We feel like the cities should be developed on a more equal footing. So how about we bring some of those project officers down to earth and in line with the people that exist in this space every day? And so if you come to one of those High Street Network and High Street Classroom sessions and they're itinerant around the city, you'll always, if we have one on kind of like markets, you'll get all street traders, and those are the people of knowledge, you know? So it's about kind of recognizing the context you're working in, recognizing the power dynamics, and trying to shift those power dynamics somehow.
Thanks, Jaden. Suma, can we hear a bit, some examples from your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had mentioned that a lot of our campaign work tends to be local as well as global. And since we're in London, I thought I'd share an example of a campaign that we've done here. Lambeth and Southwark experienced some of the highest air pollution levels in London, with the greatest impact on communities of color and those from low-income backgrounds. To tackle this, Purpose partnered with the musician and activist Love Sega and local community groups to create Live and Breathe, a movement that empowers local residents to speak up for clean air. We needed a clean air movement led by those most affected by pollution, voices that truly reflect and resonate with the community. Before planning the campaign, we hosted co-creation workshops in Lambeth, which empowered local residents to really shape the approach which we took. Working with Love Sega, we engaged with local leaders and young people to share ideas on raising awareness on air quality in the boroughs. Supported by Impact on Urban Health, Live and Breathe combined education, creative content, and grassroots mobilization to raise awareness and inspire local action. Most recently, I've been working on Verified for Climate, which is a global initiative led by the United Nations and Purpose that shifts climate narratives away from fear towards hope. Verified for Climate shows that when communities can envision a better future, to see their role in creating it, they become advocates for the policies and practices that make renewable energy transition possible. Last year, as a part of this initiative, during the UN General Assembly and New York Climate Week, we launched The Future Thanks You, and in it, an interactive digital experience that takes people through 3 simple questions to imagine the ideal world they would like to see in 2045. Without explicitly referring to climate change or energy transition, our narrative focuses on moving the conversation around renewable energy solutions from fear and pessimism to one of hope. And to encourage people to participate and tell their story, we produced a series of 7 videos, one for each continent, featuring a diverse range of voices. We had indigenous leaders, climate scientists, artists, and athletes all share their perspective of what they would like their future to look like. And through our trusted messenger network called Verified Champions, which is also a part of the Verified for Climate larger campaign, we're focusing on shifting narratives and improving the information ecosystem around climate change by combating misinformation and disinformation online across the globe. Our approach in designing is designed to empower climate experts to become content creators and share their voices online, playing an active role in countering this. In collaboration with TikTok, we equip these champions with the tools they need for this. Through workshops, resources, and peer learning, we've built their skills in fact-checking, effective storytelling, and community engagement. And this is done so that we can essentially ensure that the information that they're sharing is both credible as well as culturally resonant. One of the most interesting ways in which we've done this is by connecting climate action to cultural moments that matter locally. So, for example, by sharing videos that talked about extreme heat during the carnival in Brazil, connecting food sustainability to Ramadan traditions in Indonesia, and connecting climate action to major sporting events like the London Marathon, where champions shared behind-the-scenes sustainability initiatives. What this does is truly make climate messaging personally relevant and actionable.
Thank you, Suma. I know we're running out of time. I'm getting some eyes. But I do want to just hear briefly, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your work at Khmer, Kavya, and maybe particularly thinking about the craft communities that you work with and sort of their role in designing a sustainable future.
Yeah, I'm going to keep it super brief. Also picking up some really amazing words from what Michelle, Jaden said is I'm just assuming that dignity and ownership lies at the bottom line of the indigenous communities, irrespective of the region. So I'm not going to extend because that's anyway a bottom line. With Khmer particularly, when I was working in the sector with indigenous capacities and my personal capacities, I would not look at scale. I would look at more passion towards design as an approach. With Khmer, we try to change the lens. We look at impact and scale at a much larger level. So to give you an example, Khmer started work with indigenous cotton that grows in the most arid region of the world. Kutch receives less than 110 millimeters of rain annually. We are perennially in a drought situation, and that grows a short staple cotton, which is extremely difficult and Pre-colonialization, this was the cotton that local communities used. They weaved, they spun, they use it for all purpose. And of course, with more acrylic coming in, this was a more viable option. The market economy changed. And when we started to work, the first thing that we realized was ecological rootedness is the first approach when we are looking at skilling or scaling. So it's both ways, as I speak about this. And it took us a while to understand that intervention from a design approach cannot be at the product level. It has to be what is the kind of feed that is going to the farmers? Are they getting an assured supply year on year as a motivation to keep growing that short staple so that the cycle starts to grow? And then we started working on the hand spinning, getting back to weaving, identifying a market, because by that time, all of us, including many here, have started to adopt more softer cottons. And our indigenous cottons are very textured, they are not fine. So again, creating awareness in a contemporary market that why this is better for you, body, and so on and so forth, the journey continues. So time, you're spending time, I think he spoke about that very well, that you need to be very patient and it takes time. So time and ecological rootedness. The second point that I want to quickly highlight is cultural continuity. A lot of storytelling goes into it, but then it also translates into how we take it across the value chain. I brought one image, which I think, that's a 100% indigenous wool jacket that Khamir has designed. Now, this is just not a product for us. What happened was that the sheep that you see in the background is extremely hardy because they feed on cactus and they do not have the right temperatures. The temperature in Kutch is over 50 degrees. It's extremely hot. So the yield is really bad and the wool is extremely hard on the skin, considering the times when we are living in soft merinos and pashminas. When we started designing, the shearing was a challenge. When we started to shear, spinning that wool was a challenge because all the indigenous communities have started wearing acrylic because that's easy in the market. But then what also happened was that when we took this to the weaver, the son of the weaver said that I was listening to the story when I was young, that how this ocean turned into a white, flat salt desert. And he translated that design into this jacket. And till today, it's such a global hit. We were displaying this jacket till the 22nd in London. And 50% of the proceeds always go to the weaver, which also acts as motivation to other clusters that the intergenerational continuity is really important when we look at upskilling. And that should combine a lot of intangible heritage and a lot of other aspects. There's so many more examples, but I thought this will just break the monotony with this beautiful picture.
Thank you, Kavya. I know we're out of time. Michelle, is there anything more you would like to add based on what you've heard from the other panelists?
I would just say, I think that this idea of, being relentless about what the principles are, whether it be like making space, whether they give it to you or not waiting. I think just flipping the narrative, I think is just really, really critical. I know we did that with World Design Capital. We said, no, we are not just San Diego. We're San Diego, Tijuana. We're Tijuana, San Diego. And I don't care what our political, government says, that's who we are. And I think also just this, everyone's an expert. We're all experts. We are the only ones who know about our lives and our experience, and that then extends to our communities and to our planet. And I think we've heard that throughout the conference, and that's really important. And I think a lot of the Design Lab work in particular is really around that, and democratizing design, which is one of our projects, or even when we do research like the Center for Community Policy or Housing Policy and Design, we have a housing alliance within the community that then comes together to make sure that we are, we're constantly tuning. So I would just say I'm so inspired by all of your work, and I think this piece of we are all a community, powered by design, connected by community. Period.
Thank you, Michelle. I don't know if I'm going to get a last word, so I'm going to invite Joe back onto the stage. But as he's coming onto stage to ask questions of our panel, I will just say thank you to our panelists. I'll say, we've been talking about cultivating community champions, but what we've really spoken about is about context, dignity, equity, understanding, listening, and most importantly, love.
Yes.
So
Yes.
with that,
Absolutely.
I'll hand over to Joe to ask some questions.
I'm glad you took a last word, Sevra, because that was far more elegant than I was going to
Always be the
come up
last
with.
word, everybody. So
And surely, yeah, you captured the many different layers and angles to the discussion, which go way beyond just the title that's on the slide. So thank you. We have had a few good questions in. The first one I just wanted to pluck here, which caught my eye. Often in cultivating community champions, you have to be one first. Can you distill one key advice on how to become a community champion? Or maybe, also, do people agree with that? Is that true? And any other reflections?
I would say yes. Somebody said it before. Listen. I think that's the first thing, and ask a lot of questions. You know, make it a safe space. Yeah, that's my thought.
Anyone want to add anything?
But it's hard to be a champion, so I don't know. That's kind of,
How do you define champion, though?
that's
right?
what I'm saying. That's
Yeah.
why I think it's kind of how do you define champion? Because champion can mean so many things across. I think when I think about the champion, it's like not having this vertical kind of relationship, but more of a horizontal relationship, which kind of you see it at an eye level and kind of left to right versus up and down. And I think that's kind of what I kind of consider how you kind of can build champions.
Yep, agreed.
Brilliant.
Agreed.
Next up, Lise said, how can we ensure, informing these communities, that we're inclusive and genuinely provide the forums or systems to unlock insights and progress?
Can I answer some of that? I think we have to think infrastructurally about how we deliver this ambition. And quite often we're designers. We make our own work sometimes, but actually we are recipients of briefs. And we know what the mechanisms of projects are. It's time and it's money. And so you need time and money behind these ambitions, like real time and money behind these ambitions for that to be done well. And maybe to go back to the previous question, being a community champion in order to kind of cultivate one, I think that is really about the stories of the narrative of being present and having the time to be in a place, because that is how you build trust, right? And that, in our context, unfortunately, is powered by money and time. So we need that structure and that support in the commissioning bodies to enable us to meet that agenda.
I agree. I think for me, same thing. It's like think it systematically, and it starts with creating a pipeline of more thinkers. I think sometimes design is such an individual thing, but when thinking about the next generation is how do we talk to the kids who want to be designers and equip them not just with knowledge, but investing in their ideas and showing them that community can be changed. And I think it's really going to start with the people who grew up in those neighborhoods. And like Jaden said, that starts with being able to have the proper infrastructure, also having the proper systems which help them get to where they need to go. I think me and my wife, we donated to Royal Island School of Design because we wanted to create a pipeline of more designers to have access to be able to have the skill set. Because as a person of color, and similar to what you were talking about earlier, it's like you're always dealing with this idea about extraction, the extraction of talent, the extraction of resources, the extraction of knowledge. And then that knowledge doesn't go back, it doesn't replenish. But to be able to think about giving people skills and then to go back into their communities to build, I think that's another type of infrastructure that we need to also cultivate when building champions.
Wonderful. Some kind person in the audience has thrown me a bone with this last question, because it helps knit the first and second panels together. But last one from the audience then. I'd love the panel's insight on the rising use of AI in creative industries and specifically in the craft and community space.
I think I would just want to add, not really answer this question, but just put a perspective. When you work with communities, again, they can be divided into different clusters, approach, region. But then I also feel that impact or skilling or design approach towards by taking communities as a part has to be integrated with technology. And that is something I started to learn when I moved from a personal craftpreneur to someone who is now answerable on a lot of metrics when it comes to community. And initially, like I also feel that while I 100% agree that it has to be passion, love, and you need to start that journey as a champion first, when you look at a bigger ecosystem, you also get answerable to, let's say, a lot of grantees or the people who are supporting you in the journey. And that's where AI and tools are helpful. They help you create metrics where you can actually measure intangible. And there are a lot of examples, few at Commere, that we've been able to do to some extent.
Superb. That's all we've got time for. Huge round of applause for Sevra and our great panel. Thank you, guys.